I'm Paul Thomas. A little bit about me since I'm leading youth pastor 20 years. Then I became an associate discipleship pastor for 16, 17 years, somewhere in there. The whole time I've been really focused on discipleship. God put it within me when He created me to do discipleship. I was doing discipleship before I understood what discipleship was. Then I started going to conferences like Sun Life and Vantage Point 3 and some other books and Real Life in Idaho. And I started being able to put labels on things and understanding some things. But the principles of it was I have an intuitive ability to do discipleship. Now, I say it that way because it's not me. It's God. Amen. He gives us all gifts. He gives us all talents. He put that in me from birth. And it's just my passion. So I'm just here to share whatever I can and help you understand discipleship at a better level.
Excuse me.
Yes.
Where do you lose your hair?
Where did I lose my hair? To a razor. What happened was, a member of my small group was going through cancer. And at the time, well, just before, a little while before that, I had a mullet that was fairly long. And during my youth pastor years, and then I became an associate, and I cut it down a little bit. And a guy was going through chemo, and so I shaved my head for him. My wife liked it, I liked it, and my current church has never seen me with hair. Well, I think at this point I may not have as much as I used to.
I shaved my head for about 8 years,
Yeah.
and then let it grow out just to see how much it turned gray and how much it turned loose.
Yeah.
Mostly it's turned gray.
Yeah. Well, I always said when the sailors started leaving the ship, they were going to abandon. I was just going to abandon the whole ship. But anyways, that's what that whole story is about. So it's kind of a discipleship story. Jay, do you want to ask the question you're going to ask at the beginning?
Sure. The first thing we need to iron out is, what is a disciple?
Follower of Christ.
Follower of Christ.
The root word is discipline. So somebody who follows the discipline of a leader.
Okay. Any other?
Sharer. Yeah. Sharer of Christ.
Sharer.
That's what I was thinking, being that disciple, that follower of Christ, you need to do as Christ taught you, so then you go out and share, obedience.
Anything else? So how do I make disciples? How do you make disciples? What part do you play in that? Teacher? Caregiver.
Telling them you're giving your testimony of what God has done for you.
Sharing life.
It begins with starting relationships.
And I'd add to that, I agree 100%. It's not just starting them, though, it's interweaving lives where, I think some of the best discipling I've seen may have been informal, but it was real, and people were connected because they love the Lord, and in that, they help one another grow. I throw in learning or edification is an old King James word that I love. We make disciples, we build one another up. I mean, our former pastor here, I quote him a lot on short quotes. Pastor Bob Payne passed away, but he was a great discipler, but he always talked about, he didn't care who it was, came into the church, a new person, he could learn something from anybody, the smallest child.
I'm going to interject and Jay real quick because you jumped on something I want to hit on. Many times it's informal. In fact, most of the best ones are informal. Too many times we get formal with it and we think teaching a class is discipleship. It can be a part of it.
Amen.
But it is far too small of a part to focus just on that. One of the words we're going to talk a lot about today is intentionality.
Amen.
Intentionality is the core of much of this, is doing things very intentionally. We'll explain that a little bit later. Back to Jay.
So then the question we have to ask ourselves is, am I making disciples? And I think that's why probably most of us are in here, is we're not sure if we're doing that or how to do that. So hopefully we can give some tools to that. One of the things that we've done at Parkview, because disciple can mean so many different things to different people and it's just understood different, we've decided to define discipleship a discipler, and a disciple. So in your handout there, Parkview's definition, the first one is discipleship. And discipleship is helping people discover a deepening relationship with Jesus, his family, and his mission. That's what we've defined discipleship as. That doesn't mean we have the greatest definition, but when we talk about discipleship at Parkview, that's understood. That's preached from the pulpit. It's talked about in small groups. It's shared on one-on-one and in triads. The next one is a discipler. And a discipler is intentionally teaching someone to obediently follow Jesus. The intentionality has to be there in order to move that forward. And then disciple is someone who is intentionally trying to obediently follow Jesus. And those are just things, so when we use those words, we have an anchor to go to understand that so that we can all be aligned and head in the same direction. So,
as a discipleship pastor, how we use this is, first of all, we want people to understand the direction. That's that first one. But if I have a small group leader who goes, well, we disciple, and if I talk to them about their small group, and I'm talking about where's the fruit, what's happened, what is, and I can say to them, are you intentionally teaching people to follow Jesus, to obediently follow? And I can say, how are you doing that? It helps us stay on the same course because there's so many different views of discipleship as Jay was explaining there to you. So, encouragement I would give you if you're doing this as a church, come up with phrases and terms that keep you on the same trail. It took us a while, and we're not saying we got this figured out. Come up with your own, but it helps the continuity, it helps us reproduce. As they talked about at the beginning, we want this to be reproducible. We want it to be practical. And I'm going to show the biblical part of it in a second. So, any questions? This is a discussion. Interrupt, raise a hand. You don't want me to lecture. It's going to be much better if you ask questions, because then if I'm just talking, I have to assume I'm answering your question. If you ask a question, we can deal with it directly. So do not hesitate to ask questions. Biblical foundation. This first passage, Ephesians 4, is really critical. I'm going to start in verse 12. Their responsibility is to equip God's people to do his work and build up the church, the body of Christ. This will continue until all come to such unity in our faith and knowledge of God's Son that we will be mature in the Lord, measuring up to the full and complete standard of Christ. That's discipleship, is raising people up to maturity. Not just bringing them into the family, not just giving them a little bit of a lesson, but raising them to maturity. Now listen to what happens, especially pastors, if you're in the room. Wouldn't you like your church to sound like this? Then we will no longer be immature like children. We won't be tossed and blown about by every wind of new teaching. We will not be influenced when people try to trick us with lies so clever they sound like the truth. Instead, we will speak the truth in love, growing in every way more and more like Christ, who is the head of his body, the church. He makes the whole body fit together perfectly. As each part does its own special work, it helps the other parts grow, so that the whole body is healthy and growing and full of love. That's discipleship, and that's the result of discipleship. One of the reasons, this is going to be a personal opinion, you may disagree with me, I've spent 60 years in the church. One of the reasons the church is not where it's supposed to be nationwide is we quit discipling. We quit growing people and maturing people. We got busy doing church, and we quit doing discipleship and following Christ's command to go and make disciples. Personal opinion, you may disagree, and you're welcome to, but that's my point of view. Any thoughts, questions, insights?
I got a question. We're in our men's Bible study. We're right in this area. We have finished through verse 13. We really haven't finished verse 13 because we got off on some stuff, but I like this translation. Can you tell me what translation?
New Living Translation.
New Living. Okay. Thank you.
NLT. Some of you probably love it. Some of you probably hate it. I will tell you this about it. It is a great thing to use, especially with newer younger believers, because it makes complete sense. But it is a translation, it's not a paraphrase. Yeah, and it makes clear sense to people who you are discipling. So, very good. It is the one I use the most.
I think that when I'm, we do different levels of discipleship, kind of an overall kind of thing, and then when we're doing, I work with handicapped adults, so that's a whole different thing there, but making it applicable to a person, not me, that I'm discipling, and then God making it applicable to me it being applicable to them.
And that's one of the things we're going to really try to show you today, what we think is a very applicable way to them. Because one of the critical elements of discipleship is meet them where they are. Far too often we try to see them at an older age. I've been a believer for 55 years, okay? So I have a tendency to want to, I don't remember what it was like to be a new believer. And I assume there's things about them that I put them at a different level and I get disappointed. We're going to talk a lot about that. And that's going to be some of the key parts. The other passages there, 2 Timothy 2:2, you're familiar with it. We're supposed to teach what we've been taught. Just take what you know and take it out. Then Jesus' passage in Matthew about go and make disciples. Teach these disciples to obey all the commands I've given you. And the last passage I have there in Ephesians 2:10, it's just something I think is really critical for a disciple to understand. For we are God's masterpiece. He has created us anew in Christ Jesus so we can do the good things He planned for us long ago. Often when I'm working with a younger disciple, I help them understand they're a masterpiece. They have a tendency, and a lot of us have a tendency, the pastor's somebody special. I'm just one of those people.
Yeah.
But guess what? According to this, I disagree with you. We are His masterpiece. We're not the chalk drawing, we're the masterpiece. And when they understand that, it helps them feel worth and value in Christ. Not in themselves, not in what they've done, but in who He's made them to be.
That kind of special.
That kind
I
of
thought they
special.
were talking about me going to seminary on the short bus.
Yeah.
Okay. All right.
Exactly.
Very special.
What we want to take you through on page 4 is a tool, and it's a graph there. And what we're going to try to do is relate maturing the human body with maturing the spiritual body. Okay? All of us have gone through a process. I think we're all healthy human beings in here to some extent. Meaning we weren't limited in our maturing ability. We've matured. It took time. And every one of us had to go through processes. Every one of us got our diaper changed. Every one of us. You didn't get to skip it because you were better than anybody else or anything like this line. We all went through that process. We're going to relate this spiritually, and that's what this graph is. Now, I would normally say the dark green circle, though we have color copies of dark green. Otherwise, if you have black and white, just that circle right here that starts up here with spiritual death. This is what we want you to focus on. The graph can be kind of confusing, but we're going to hit you 2 other parts, and I'm going to do one, and Jay's going to do the other one. Down at the bottom left is the thing that says God's part, our part, their part. I want to free you up from some responsibility. You are responsible to do your part. You are not responsible to do God's part, and you're not responsible to do their part. I tried for years in youth ministry. I did God's part and their part, and failed and got frustrated and was angry at times. If they only would, But when I found this, and I went, it's not my job. Biblical example. Rich young ruler comes to Christ. God has already been doing His part by working on his life, calling him to Him. So the rich young ruler comes to Christ and says, what must I do to be saved, basically? Christ gives some information, and Christ lays out the truth before him. What was the rich young ruler's response? Turn and walk away. What did Christ's response? Now, did Christ go like many of us? Let me re-explain that to you. We're going to change that. We can make that easier for you. We don't want to lose you. And Christ, it says Christ loved him. What was Christ's response? I'm here when you're ready, basically.
It was his, not Christ's decision, but the rich young ruler's decision to come.
Yes. Their part. you will have, if you get into discipleship, some heartbreak. Okay? It's gonna happen. I hate to tell you that. Some of it's gonna be real heartbreaking, you never see them come back. Some of it's gonna be just setbacks. But that's their part. You cannot take that on yourself. The second thing we want to talk about is the formula. Jay's gonna talk about that.
Yeah, at the top of the chart there, you see the IL plus RE plus Bible equals disciples. The IL is intentional leadership. And just like, we could say this is our small group, so we're getting together. If we are not intentional in what we're trying to teach or help with, that just makes us a social group. We can have a great relational environment, and we can even be talking Bible stuff, but without intentionality, it ends up being a social group. The RE, relational environment, you've got to develop relationships with people, because eventually, if we're getting intentional into people's lives, the relationship means that I know you well enough and you know me well enough that when you get to one of those points that it's like, look, you've got to call somebody out on the paperwork there, or pavement, whatever. You have the relationship to be able to do that. And, you'll just drive people away. So if we have an intentional leadership without a relational environment and the Bible, why we're just, teaching a class and hoping somebody picks up on it and goes. The Bible stands for itself. If we don't have the Bible, we have a cult, right? We can be intentional and have a relational environment about anything. You'd end up with a cult. So that's, in every step of the way, there's intentional leadership with your relational environment and biblical principles to disciple somebody along.
My experience in either small group ministry or discipleship ministry is the IL, the intentional leadership, is often the one that's lacking. We're Baptists, we're pretty good with relationships, we're Bible-based, but we often struggle with an intentionality. I will talk to my small group leaders and say, where's your group at? Well, we're going through John. No, where's your group at? Where are you headed? There should be a plan, there should be a guide, the direction you want to go. It may take time, because often we have to wait for God to open the door. But when He opens that door, we got to be ready to run through it, because we know where we're headed. I'll share later, but one of my best tools that the church has allowed me to do is I go to lunch with somebody every day. And I may go with a fairly new believer or a spiritually dead person 3, 4, 5 times. We don't talk God. We do the relationship, and I'm establishing a relationship. But I know where I want to go. The intentionality's there, and I'm always looking for that door to open and walk through it. So it's not that we force it through, but we know where we're headed. And if that crack happens, we're there. So that's what we mean by intentionality. And even with the later stages of the spiritual growth, you know what the next step is and where you're moving. I use example, if you went to your third graders class and said to the teacher at the beginning of the year, so what are your plans this year? Oh, I hope we learn something this year. Yeah, but how many of our small groups, how many of our spiritual relationships have that philosophy? We're hoping something sticks. Intentionality is critical. I think the lecture's over. I'll get off my high horse. Now, back. Any questions on any of that? Back to our little graph in the middle of the circle, the green one, dead. First word is dead there. Describe a dead person for me. Without Christ? No, I mean a human dead person. Human dead person. No heartbeat. No heartbeat, no life. A little flat, kind of just dull. No. There's no life. Same as spiritual dead. You hit it.
Yeah.
They're spiritually dead. They need life. So, back to my part, when I'm dealing with a spiritually dead person, what do they need? Jesus. Period. I may help them with some other things. They need my love and some other things. But what they need is Jesus. One of the mistakes the churches I've been a part of and I've seen make is this. We teach people how to talk like a Christian, dress like a Christian, act like a Christian, and never give them Jesus. And that scares me to death because they're walking zombies. And we can't, eventually, they do such a good job, we can't distinguish which ones are Christians and which ones are not. Because we never finished this deal. We never got the spiritually dead and gave them life. We just dressed them up. Then the good part, though, is life, salvation, birth. And that's that little pie piece of born again that's going up there. You see that. So a spiritual dead person, our part is to share Jesus with them, show him, example of him, and that's the key part. Now we hit an infant. Did you have anything you wanted to add, Trey? Okay, you had that look. What does a human infant, describe a human infant for me. Tell me about a human infant. Selfish.
Dependent.
Dependent. Excuse me. Yes.
Growing.
Dependent. Growing.
Changing.
Oh yeah, it's amazing. What
Crying.
things. Discovery, crying.
Temper.
Well, temper. What else? Now let's go into some of the physical actions of a spiritual or an infant. What do they do every day? Poop. Cry out. They poop. They spit up on you. When my kids were little, we used to walk. We lived right next to our church, and I remember walking in. This is back when I wore a suit every Sunday. Often there was this white stuff down my back. Formula, because my son spit up. Now, did I get mad at him? No. How dare you spit up on my suit? No, because he's an infant. What is a spiritual infant? Tolerance. Patience, loving where they're at. Feeding, protection. They need their diaper changed every once in a while. They're going to do it. They're going to spit up on you. They're going to be selfish. It's going to be messy. And you can't go, seriously? Because that's who they are. They don't know any better. We have to come to the grips of understanding that. It's not up to them, because that's who they are. And we have to understand where they are. And if they're going to do these things and not go, because here's the problem. They may be 60 years old. But they're going to act like an infant. And they may throw a fit and cry and stomp their feet. And as parents, we go, that's what babies do.
If everybody changes to page 5, we can start walking through some.
Yes, thank you.
5 is spiritually dead, 6 is the spiritual infant. So
Now, I want to
take notes or whatever.
Sorry. One of the things that the book I showed you earlier really helps with, how do you identify? Because we just talked about the fact that they don't come in with a name tag in a spiritual age. And you can tell by phrases and actions that they do. In the back of this book, they give you, and it's not nothing biblical, but it's reality, different phrases that often these people will use at different stages. Example, in spiritual infant. I believe in Jesus, but my church is when I'm in the woods or on a lake. I don't have to go to church to be a Christian. People have hurt me, so it's just me and God. When you hear those kind of phrases, you understand where they're at. And you meet them where they're at. And you accept that for them. Those are just phrases, and I'll read some other ones later. But those kind of things, again, there's no inspiration behind any of these, just experience. But it helps us understand and identify by their actions who they are. And key part, what they need and what's next for them. Because that's the critical part. We've got to know what they need now and what the next step is. So that leads us on our chart. A little bit outside of that infant, there's words like share your life, share new truths, share new habits, share. So the object of having a spiritual infant, the objective of your part is share. Tell them about your experiences in life. Tell them about what's happening with you. When it talks about new habits, one of the examples I use, a new Christian quite a few years ago, 50-some-year-old man, rough guy, but he became a believer. It was real. I went fishing with him a couple times. First couple times was focused on one thing, relational environment. tough it out and try fishing, you know, it was tough, and somebody had to do it. But spend time, I didn't just sit there and pound the biblical truth out. But then, after about the second, third trip, I said, you want to look into the Bible a little bit more? Yeah, but I don't know how to do it. I said, here's what we do. Next week, read this chapter, and we'll talk about it when we're fishing. What I was doing was introducing him to a new habit, reading your Bible. What we have a tendency to do is say, here's your assignment, go home and do it, and, read a book of John and we'll see you later. I was giving him bite-sized pieces, and we would just talk about it. That's just introducing him to a new habit. There's a bunch of ways you can do that. That's just one example. So a spiritual infant is selfish. They are in need of care, they're in need of protection, they're in need of feeding, and we need to share, help them understand these things, and share with them and care for them. Any questions? I know I'm not that good a teacher. Maybe it's Jay. Hey, tell me about a human infant or child. Describe a human child for me.
Active.
Active, yes. I was seeing many parents chasing kids around a little bit ago.
Very inquisitive.
Inquisitive, yes.
Pushing the envelope.
Pushing the envelope. Wanted to see what the boundaries are. But the inquisitive, they want to know.
Toddler stage, they're honest.
They're honest.
Very honest. Very honest.
Jesus said, if you're like a child,
What other?
enter the kingdom.
Yes, you gotta be like a child, and that's that moldable stage. What other character? What are our responsibilities to a child?
To teach and love.
Discipline.
Yeah.
We're giving them the boundaries. We're showing, but we're also introducing them to new people. Again, you could put 4 infants in a room; they won't even know they're together. But you put 4 kids in a room, and they're taking from mine, your, but they interact. They're beginning that interaction phase. Other aspects. What are some of the needs, and what are some of the responsibilities we have with children?
Teaching them right from wrong.
Teaching them right from wrong. Because they don't know.
They want to see it.
Protecting them.
Yeah.
Protecting them.
Yeah.
They can feed themselves now, but you need to direct what they're feeding.
Make sure
Yes.
they don't feed themselves
Yeah.
Clorox.
Yeah.
Or just
iPods.
candy
Yeah.
the whole time. Yeah.
They want to do it themselves.
Yes.
You do it, but you have to model what you want them to do. This is your proper table manners as opposed to.
Now let's make the jump to spiritual, and just use the feeding part. Yeah, we don't have to spoon feed them anymore. But we don't just go, because they're going to eat candy, or they're going to eat sweets.
Yes, or not at all.
You have to make sure, or not at all. You have to give them a balanced diet.
The good stuff, the easy stuff is what they go for.
Yes.
Yeah.
So now we're starting to move and expand that whole process. What are some of the other things a spiritual child needs?
The Bible
The Bible.
and Jesus' teachings.
Example.
Example.
From us.
And a plan.
A schedule, a plan.
Is it Amber, is that correct? Mentioned discipline earlier. I think that's important.
Interaction with other Christians.
They need to be exposed to other Christians and be around other Christians, not just on their own and you and them. You used the word protection earlier. Do you ever think you have to protect? You ever think of that new believer? You need to protect them and guard them? Some of us don't. Well, they're an adult, but they need protection because the word, back to the Ephesians passage, lies so clever they sound like the truth.
Yes.
New ways of teaching. They're being bombarded with new information. Our job is to be a breakwater there to keep them learning.
Also, when they're growing, that's when Satan's gonna get those buttons
That's
and turn everything around. They just believe him. He's gonna do everything he can to get that one back.
Hey, Pastor, we just signed up for a free in-home Bible study. Elder John and Elder Bob are teaching if they came to the door. It doesn't cost anything.
Or there's a new TV show on TV that's about Jesus.
Oh, yes.
But it's not.
God.
Yeah. They just need those guides. Now, how many of you are mothers? What was life like as a mother? Did it change much when you went from not a mother to a mother? What was one of the things you lost?
Our identity. Sleep.
Identity, sleep,
Privacy.
privacy,
Yes.
time.
Uh-huh.
All of those same things go into this. You have a spiritual infant, a spiritual child. It takes time. And privacy is gone because guess what? You're sharing your life. You're going to share things with those people that you may not have shared with other people in your life. I always said my youth group knew more about my life than my parents ever dreamed of knowing. And it's best that way.
When they hear you swear, you can't give them.
No, they get you right then.
When I did, and my kids said, well, what'd you say? I said shit.
Chip.
Well, they knew better. And God had to teach me that I had to be a better example.
What did you say, Bernie?
One of the things that's interesting though is here's what wonderful things about discipleship. It's a two-way street. We learn more because they're responsible on us. Parents, all of a sudden your life changes when you're a parent because you're going, if I say this or do this or do, I'm responsible for this person.
You're both accountable.
Changes you. That's discipleship.
You would say not as I do? Does that work?
Yeah, something like that. But doesn't work to it. So in the outer circle there, the key word for children is connect. Connect them to a small group, a family. Connect them to God. Connect them to their purpose. So our job, our role here is connect them. Get them involved with other people. Anything you want to add, Jay?
Well, we've got the example of discipleship here, and Paul, of course, is leading it, and I'm an apprentice, and we need to keep that in mind as we're, especially in small groups and stuff like that, where discipleship happens too. Is you want to make sure if you're the leader of the group that you have someone that is the apprentice ready, so that when you need to step away, they can take over. That gets us, as we start growing. Then, as we'll see here in a little bit, the young adult has the opportunity to be introduced into ministry and stuff like that. So just part of the process, and if you keep that in mind as you're going through this, that's the intentional leadership, because you want to help them get through every stage. So.
That's one of the things, I don't consider myself a pastor, I consider myself a coach. Because I coached volleyball for 15 years, and so I understand coaching. I do the same thing with my disciples. I'm coaching them, I'm training them, I'm putting them through different drills. They just don't realize it. Refining their skills. And so I see myself more as a coach in that aspect. One of the things that's going to come out is pastors who are in the room. A lot of times we struggle in pastoring, it's about us. I don't mean that rudely. We want control. We want power. The whole goal of discipleship is to release. I had a really cool moment not too long ago. I've been in that's other church ago. I've been in Lexington for 11 years almost. And I've been really focusing on the discipleship since I got there. About a year and a half ago, all of a sudden I sat at my desk and I was like, wow, I don't even do. Because a whole bunch of the people I've been focusing on had gotten to the point where I was releasing them out. It was really cool. Now I had to not stay there long and just go, let's go. But that's what you want. You want to work your way out of a job. But a bunch of the people all of a sudden, they had taken responsibility and were going, and I was able to go, cool, this is good. So that's the goal. Young adult, describe young adult. We're talking late teens, early 20s. Describe them for me.
They know everything now.
They know everything. Get out of their way because they got it figured out. Okay, great. Those of you in your late 20s or early 20s, sorry. No.
They stick up for one another. They're very much not the team, but they're going to save the world one at a time.
Driven and motivated, but unwise.
Yes.
That is a really good way. They have energy. They want to go, go, go. And that's a great thing. They just haven't learned it doesn't always work this way.
The free and home Bible study may not be a great idea.
Yeah. So what does a young adult, not spiritual, what does a young adult need from an older adult?
Counsel, direction, wisdom.
God. And it's like and acceptance. Yes.
As a parent, how many of you have raised children through that phase?
Successfully.
I don't know if it's a word. It's a really
work in progress. He's only 30 something.
It's a real interesting process because you see what needs to happen. You're not going to let them drive off the cliff, but you can't control like you did. But it goes against our nature. We want to control it. At least I did. I'm a fixer. Do you realize if you do this is what? Okay, I got to let them go. It's a giving and taking. And it's a little bit here, a little bit there. For both of my children, I ended up writing them letters at one point. I gave them my daughter jewelry, my son something else, and I just said, I'm here to support you. I'm here to care for you, but I'm going to do the best I can. I didn't say I would. To do the best I can to let you make the decisions. I'm always here if you need advice.
Unconditional love.
Yes. This is what the spiritual young adult needs. Is that releasing them to do the work because they got it figured out. But being there when they stumble and trip and fall and guide them to what needs to be next. That's the process of spiritual young adult. So here it says train to do ministries, equip for ministries, provide ministry opportunities, release to do ministries. Make sense? Jay?
What works better on young adults? Telling them how to do it, or asking them questions on why they did what they did? Asking, yeah. At this point, we can't just teach them and tell them stuff because they're not going to listen. But we let them discover the truths for themselves. The intentional leadership brings them back to biblical truths and lets them discover that.
But you know it hurts when they've gone out and done something they know they shouldn't do. And you try to explain it to them, and they go up one side and down the other on you, act like it was our fault in the beginning. And that's hard to take sometimes.
And it's the same with our human children, and it's the same with our spiritual children.
That's right.
And that's because they have confidence, they know what they're doing, and they don't like to admit failure.
That's right. And of course, you know, mother never knows that. Only father does.
Now here's something, well, before I go into my next phase of this. Questions, thoughts?
What do you do when your son went to Calvary Chapel and even took part in taking sermon for the minister who's on vacation? And then his wife isn't happy there, so they go church hopping for her, and he gets stuck in a Orthodox church. And they add to their Bible, and I can see that it's right. So what do I tell him?
Well, we're going to hit that in a generality, because you hit where I want to go. One of the mistakes that often happens, and I am guilty as guilty charged on this with spiritual discipleship.
And he's so sincere.
Oh yeah, we get people to this
I think
phase,
he'd make a good monk.
and we release them, and we turn them loose, and we don't monitor and guide them. We just turn them loose, and they're passionate. They're passionate about what they're doing because that's one of the things here. They want to serve. They want to go. They want to, but no one is working with them to work through the problems. And then they have problems, there's issues, or they just get burned out and they fall on their face. Yeah. We see this over and over again. One of the worst mistakes I've made in discipling, and one of the worst mistakes I see the church is making in discipling, is we release them too early.
Yes.
We turn them loose and we say, man, because you are just passionate about this, go. And we don't walk with them through that process. Because we want them to serve. Now, we're supposed to release them to do service here, but we're walking with them.
Right.
and we're guiding them throughout this. So my mistake often has been, and I don't think I'm alone, is I get them to this point, they're eager, and I just go, you're in charge, you're in charge, you're in charge. And I'm seeing all these people back here in the spiritual childhood phase and spiritual infant phase, so I want to go help them. And so I neglect these people. And they feel abandoned. They feel alone. And they're not equipped yet to go all the way through. And they get frustrated. And they think, well, one of the problems we have is when we give them too much responsibility at this age. They should have responsibility, but under the authority of someone else, they have a tendency that stifles their growth. This ends up as far as they go. I'll give a personal example. I was talking to my sister recently. My dad was in the ministry. He got saved when he was 19, 20. Okay. Got saved 19, 20. Within 3-4 years, he was in seminary. And within 3 years after that, he was leaving church. He wasn't mature. No one had really discipled him. And he was put in charge. So what happens is he's put in charge, but he's not ready to do it. And he was a good pastor, but in hindsight, I saw a lot of things in his ministry that he was resisting because he didn't know what to do. And he fought because he wasn't ready. No one had discipled him. And it was much later that he really grew to that spiritual maturity phase. We do that to people all the time. So we have pastors, and we have deacons, and we have Sunday school teachers, and leaders who are supposed to be at the young adult phase, working, serving, doing amazing things, but still being mentored, still being discipled. And when they don't get that, they get stuck at that phase, and they never mature on. And they're there forever and ever and ever. And it's a shame. Just an observation on my part. Thoughts?
Everybody at whatever stage you're at should have an advocate.
Yes. And here's
It doesn't matter how old you are, you still need spiritually, physically, whatever, you still need an advocate.
Jay's talked on every session about reaching up and reaching back. What we need to have at this point is they need to be discipling someone else, but being discipled by someone else. Then they mature correctly. Because one of the things we talked about earlier, one of the best ways to mature is to disciple someone. It forces us to clean up our act.
But he did do that. When he went to the airport in Bozeman, they had to pick up this guy. And this guy says, can you tell me how to get to Big Sky? And my son says, well, we not only tell you how to get to Big Sky, we'll take you there. On the way there, they led him to Christ. So he's had that.
Right.
But somehow he's got on a bad turn now.
Well, and that's where I'm saying, the person who's a young adult, spiritually, and I can't speak for your son, but the person who's a young adult spiritually, they are ready to serve. These are the eager ones, and that's why we have a tendency to release them, because they're already excited, they're already going. The mistake we make is we move them into positions too quickly that they are not equipped to handle, or they don't have a support unit around them. My father, all of a sudden, he's a pastor in North Dakota by himself. He wasn't ready for that. And now he survived and he did well, but there was we need to mature people. My point of all this is we need to mature people to maturity. The standard has been way too low and it's way too easy to accomplish. We need higher maturity levels because that's what we need. We'll talk about that, what that is in a moment. Other thoughts?
One of the things that I was thinking of in this area is an infant, you can meet that infant's need and you can set the infant aside for a little bit until they have another need. A child, you can get them busy with some toys and stuff like that, and you can set them aside, so to speak.
To do the dishes.
A young adult, though, the damage that they can do to themselves or something else is a lot more because of the position they're in or the age they're at and stuff like that. So you need to spend more intentional time with a young adult so that when things start heading the wrong direction, you can correct it a lot quicker. You know, you don't have to change a diaper just as soon as it's dirty, you know.
Within the first week is always good.
Yeah.
But if a young adult starts heading the wrong direction, you don't want to leave them heading that direction very long. And you need to make sure you're connecting with them on a regular basis so that you can correct that situation a lot quicker.
The other thing, remember 3 phrases: my part, God's part, their part. Yeah. And I'll also throw this for parents, meaning human parents. We can do our part. God can do his part. It does not guarantee their part. And we need to accept that. And you know, I youth pastor, I said, for 20 years. One of the biggest surprises I had going from youth ministry to adult ministry was how many people now currently my age were living in regret for where their children were. And what I learned was this: if you did the best you could at the time you did, you know, with everything we knew, because none of us knew everything about it, you have to be able to say, I did the best I could.
Yes.
If you didn't do what you should have done, you need to go to people and say, I'm sorry. But in both cases, move on, because we cannot live our children's life, both spiritually and physically. Discipleship is a painful thing. You will shed tears. It will hurt, because you will have people you pour into, and there's nothing you can do necessarily about it, because there is their choice.
Was it Festus that said to Paul, almost you have persuaded me?
Yes.
That had to be one of those tearful moments for Paul, when here's this man who he knows God loves, and he's been talking with him, sharing with him, and the guy himself says, you know, you're this close, but not there.
I think that was probably painful for Paul, but if you get to 2 Timothy where he talks about who deserted him, and I think it was David, completely went off track.
Yeah.
Having invested in that, like Festus was before him in court, and I could see that being painful, but when you discipled somebody or been close to them, and then you see them head off the trail, and you know they're headed for trouble, but you can't physically restrain them, or you can't, you pray for them, and you can trust that the Lord's going to get to them, but they may end up with some scars, and we all do. One of the things I was thinking about as you were talking, and I related to discipleship because it's really where I was at, but as a young, I didn't become a Christian until I was 19, like your dad. And the Lord opened the door in about 5 years for full-time ministry. I've been a telephone man, I've been electronics in the Navy, and it kind of blew me away. You know, I'm in a full-time church pastor, and I haven't had any formal training. Now, I had a great discipling pastor that kind of prepared me. But I've been there about 6 months, and the associational director of missions, and this kind of relates to what we're talking about, discipling one another, took me to lunch one day, which I enjoyed because he bought it. But Herschel was his name, and I'd known him as a pastor. He'd been a pastor in that same association for about 12 years, and then he became the director of missions. But he was pastoring me, and he said, Dave, you've been there about 6, 7 months, right? Yeah. Who are you? I said, what do you mean? Who am I? Who are you, the people? He said, I said, well, I'm the pastor. He says, no. I said, no? He said, I've been talking to people there. You're the preacher boy. And he said, they don't put it in those terms, but I do. He said, you'll become their pastor when you hurt alongside of them because they're in the hospital, or they've lost a loved one, or they're going through a divorce, or they're going through some kind of tragedy in their lives. And, if we don't walk alongside one another through the pains, then we're not discipling. We're not, and he grew me through that whole first pastor too.
And you see 2 things. One is
him.
Something you had my dad didn't have was someone who discipled you. Plus, he taught you how to disciple and care for your people.
Yeah.
You had somebody below,
real
and you had something. You had this.
That's a good analogy. Yes,
exactly. We all need that. We all need that. Other thoughts?
There's always, if there's life in the body, there's hope for the soul.
Amen.
And that's for the human kids and the spiritual kids. You just keep saying that and keep praying and keep going.
We don't. One of the things I love about Parkview is we have just so many stories of broken people who did things and lived in lives that nobody needs to be in. But God has restored them, and they're in process. And I don't know how many times I've used that as an example with other parents going, there's one sitting back there. So he's had his issues, like all of us, but he's had some human issues that are up there. And he's doing great, chairman of our deacon board. And probably when you were doing drugs, that wasn't really on your radar.
That wasn't even close.
Some of those scars are helpful in helping others along the way,
Yes,
though.
right.
That you've had, you can be more compassionate. And I think Paul had something to say about that.
One of the rules of discipleship I found, your greatest pain, God does not waste pain. Your
Amen.
greatest pains will be used to help others.
Amen.
It's amazing how that works. And yeah. So, thank you. Last part. Rare air here. Parents. We do not have a lot of spiritual parents. I'm going to just flat out say that. And so, describe a human parent for me. What makes you a human parent?
Fertile.
Fertile. You've produced.
You know, I was going to say children, not fertile. You can be fertile and not have kids. Right?
You make mistakes.
You've made mistakes.
Yes.
I have yet to meet the perfect parent. The perfect parent has yet to have children.
They'll find out.
So you've produced. You make mistakes. What are some of the responsibilities of a parent?
Giving everything you have.
Giving everything you have.
Awesome.
Mothers,
Yeah.
did your life change when you had kids? Yes, we talked about that. It changes.
Completely.
You don't have say over your life. You've had to sacrifice. Well, I'd like to get a full night's sleep tonight, and I think I'm going to watch this TV show. No!
Or the bathroom by yourself.
Yes. Well, we're talking earlier. Privacy's gone
Oh,
as a parent, especially
We
as a
also
mother.
have extreme joy, extreme sadness, but extreme joy when you see them go through the bad drug issues, the prison, the whole whatever, and they're taking theirs to church, and you know that's where the joy is. When you see those little things, or the kid that was naughty at your house when they came over, and he's wanting you to come and visit him now, or come to be present for his wedding, or whatever.
There's a joy to it that's beyond what we can. And
yeah,
it's not just those who come back to it, but one of my greatest observations that I enjoy, I just enjoy this one. You go to meet a first-time father before the hospital. And he's like, You go up to the hospital right after the baby's born. Only thing this baby's caused is pain for his wife and money for him and inconvenience. And you go, basically, he will kill you if you go near that child in a negative way. It comes within you at birth. You are in control of this person. You are protected. Same as spiritual. You know you are a parent, spiritual parent, when you take ownership. You are willing to sacrifice for others above yourself. You will kill for that child. You take pain and joy. Those are the attributes of a spiritual parent. It's not about age. It's not about position within your church. It's not about how long you've been a believer. It's about you have taken ownership. One of the problems we have in churches, we have people who have reached a certain age, a certain status, and we call them spiritual parents. I say you cannot be a spiritual parent until you are caring for the spiritual lives of others. Absolutely. And when I mean caring for them, what I described a few moments ago, you don't have privacy. You don't have free time as much as you used to, at least. You will give for that child of yours. Those are the signs of a spiritual parent. They're rare. They are rare. Thoughts?
it's twice as much prayer for every word that comes out of your mouth. I think these two have prayed for me when I didn't even know I needed prayer. I think that's the way it works. Twice as much prayer for every word out of your mouth.
And it's unconditional, as you talked about, that unconditional love. These are the attributes we want to put into people. Now, you can't just put it, that's what our desire in discipling. We want to finish people to spiritual parenthood.
Right.
So think about the church. Those of you who've been in church a long time, if you had 20 parents, what could you do? If you had 20 spiritual parents who said, I'm going to take responsibility for her, I'm going to take responsibility for him, and we're going to grow them up. And it's going to take some time, and you can't do it in groups. It's 1, 2 at a time.
Yeah.
What would happen in your churches in the future?
Well, they'd still exist.
They would still exist, but many of them are not.
And the circle would grow.
And what would happen is then they would grow to be parents, and then the multiplication starts to occur, and now we are growing disciples of Christ, not just followers of Christ. There's a difference in my mind.
Yeah. And then do you get to be a grandparent where you just get all the joy and none of the hassle?
Pastoring one of the church here,
The
I
God's
can say there's a big difference
That
between a
doesn't
disciple of Christ and a follower of Christ.
I go there because we don't have it on here. But one of the things that kind of happens, I talked about the joy I had a little while ago. The people I've worked with, now they come to me and ask me questions.
Yeah.
Just like my kids come to me and go, we're raising such and such, like your kids come to you and ask me, parent, this grandparent. I have disciple kids who come to me and say, this happened the other day, what should I do? That's fun. And it's a lot easier because my blood and sweat's not involved as much. Just like grandparent is a lot easier in some ways. You get the picture we're looking at. And why and how, does this give you a process? Key is, understand where they're at. Understand their term out. Where are they? What do they need?
Did you guys make this diagram? I love this.
No, it comes right. I will give Jim Putnam all the credit in the world.
But it helps to visualize it.
Yes.
This is
And it just makes sense.
all bit right out of the Bible and just putting it in the diagram.
If you know anything about Sun Life Ministries, which was a ministry out of Chicago under Dan Spader, he had the same principles, but he had different terminology. And that's what I grew up under. This just goes, okay, I can look at you and say, this is a young believer. I can look at you and say, this is a spiritual infant. It brings a whole nother understanding of what is going on and what they need.
Real good.
So, and he goes into much, the book I showed earlier, this one with the cover on it, goes into a lot of detail about it. There's a workbook there, yep, that one right there. And we will get, like I said, this is what's on this clipboard. If you need to change anything after the session, feel free to. We'll get it to you, it's yours. We want to put as much of this into your hands as possible so you can grasp it. A couple things as we get near, I'll let you ask questions in a minute, but I want to cover a couple things. If this excites you and you're excited about discipleship, if you want to go, don't make the mistakes I made, which is we're going to change the church tomorrow, we're going to make this happen. One person. Disciple a person. Now, if you're a pastor, you can do it a little differently, but if you're a lay person, take care of one person, grow them up in the faith, make sure you do the best you can so they can disciple someone who disciples someone who disciples someone. That's one of the critical things. Meet them where they're at, love them, and move them through the process. Some critical parts is teach them, and it's organic. People say, what books should we use? There's a very organicness to it because every person's very different. But be open to listening to the Holy Spirit and what the Holy Spirit needs and put that within them. So you have to be being fed so you can feed them. One of the illustrations I've used before is I'm working with a guy right now. He would be moving from childhood into early young adult, young adolescence spiritually. And he asked me a question, and guess what? It happened to be the verse I read that day. Wonder how that worked out. That's God. And it works that way, and that's how we disciple. We are listening to the Holy Spirit, we're in His Word, and all we can do is be His vessel. So, thoughts, questions, Jay or I?
You didn't talk about witnessing and This is all somebody who's become a Christian.
Spiritual death. The witnessing comes in their aspect. It's a full process. Back to fertile, can't make babies. I mean, it's a process. Discipleship is from spiritual death all the way to the grave.
Okay, well, we have a lady in our church that I used to call her my baby Christian. She's come out of a drug environment and into Christ, and she's been gone now for a while. She made the remark that she felt like she was being set up, that somebody was setting her up to fail. I don't know who she was talking about, but I've just been broken hearted about it, and I know that I've just got to turn over to God. I know that. But my friend Loretta and I are going to go over. I told her, I said, we're going to go over and see you because we miss you. And so I just let God work it out.
And that's where the relational environment comes in. If we have that relational environment, we keep it going. You go back to the sower, the parable of the sower. He only succeeded, I mean, depending on how you want to interpret it, maybe 25% of the time, maybe 50%. You know, a lot of them, the roots didn't go down. We're going to have those. That's where the pain comes in. We can't, again, my part, God, I have to be answerable to God that I did everything I could.
But I know that she's been very, very sick.
Yeah. And there's a lot of things that people go through. So, Jay, you had something.
Yeah, I was just going to say every stage has its benefit. And we've all been through those or are currently in one of those. And, you know, a lot of people, well, I got to be a spiritual parent, but I don't know how to do this. That's a good indication you're not quite a spiritual parent yet. So what you need to do then is reach out to somebody so that they can mentor you to that spiritual parent. Then you can start bringing somebody along. So it's always the intentional leadership of understanding where they're at, where you're at, and what's that next step.
And some of you are going to be better at different phases. We've talked about this all before. Jay is better at the left side of the thing than I am. I'm better from about 3 o'clock in here. I know people who are great at the witnessing, like you brought up. You're going to have strengths, and sometimes it's a team effort. I'm good here. Here you go. Here's the next person. And that's the body working together. The part, I want to go back to Jenna's comment about the witnessing. One of the problems I've seen, this is personal opinion, we have a tendency, and I use it from a unit point of view, to make babies and hope they grow up spiritually.
Well, isn't that basically what evangelistic ministries that come in and fill a house full of brand new born again babies and then leave them laid by the roadside to flounder?
And hope it works out well.
Yeah, that's
Our DRs, that bothers me too, but we do assign them to local churches, hoping, praying.
There's places where it's going to happen, and we can't do anything about it. But when it's in our control, we have to do the best we can. And I'm going to use 2 illustrations along that line. When I lived in Detroit, there was a statistic in the newspaper that basically at the time, 76% of the births in the city were illegitimate births.
Yeah.
Now, you think of what Detroit's like right now. We're doing that to the church. We're not growing up, we're just making babies, and we're not growing them up, and it's going to cause us this kind of dysfunction. Another illustration of what you do, because sometimes the best witnesses are young believers.
Yeah.
They know no fear.
They have no fear. Don't judge me on this discussion because I can explain it more a bit later, but I was working with a stripper. She had become a Christian, an exotic dancer. And she was on fire for God. Still exotic dancing. She just hadn't quite figured things out. But she was a baby. She was an infant. And she was bringing girls over to the house, and we were witnessing to them. And she was just witnessing to them. And she was trying to figure out what to do. And this was before she was bringing them over to our house. And I explained to her, you're driving down the street, you just see 2 infants and a 2-year-old. What do they need? So humanly, you're driving down the street and you see by themselves a 2-year-old and 2 infants. They need an adult. So when you get these situations like that one was, What did she need? She needed a spiritual adult. Her passion's great.
Yeah.
It was right, but she's not equipped to care for the infants. So this is a part of that whole process and grasping that so you can see what the needs are. So we try to connect her with some of the spiritual adults and work that out. I think we're supposed to go.